Hi, I'll continue with paragraph 8 of the chapter on Appoggiaturas from Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach's Versuch über die wahre Art, das Klavier zu spielen. Da die Zeichen der Vorschläge nebst den Zeichen der Triller beinahe die einzigen allenthalben Bekannten sind, so findet man sie auch gemeiniglich angedeutet. Da man sich aber dennoch nicht allezeit hierauf verlassen kann, so muss man versuchen, inwieweit es möglich ist, den Sitz dieser veränderlichen Vorschläge zu bestimmen. Außerdem, was wir in Paragraph 6 gesehen haben, so kommen die Vorschläge von veränderlicher Geltung gemeiniglich vor. Bei gleichem Takte im Niederschlage, Figur 2a, und Aufheben, B. Bei ungleichem Takte aber im Niederschlage alleine, Figur 3, allezeit vor einer etwas langen Note. Man findet sie ferner vor den Schlusstrillern, Figur 4a. Vor den halben Cadenzen, B. Vor den Einschnitten, C. Vor den Fermaten, D. Und vor der Schlussnote, nach E und ohne vorhergegangenen Triller, F. Wir sehen bei dem Exempel E, dass nach dem Triller der Vorschlag von unten besser tut als der von oben. Deswegen würde der Fall bei G nicht gut klingen. Langsame punktierte Noten vertragen diese Art von Vorschlägen ebenfalls. H. Wenn diese Art von Noten auch schon geschwänzt wären, so muss doch die Zeitmaß gemäßigt sein. I'll go through before I continue with the next paragraphs, I'll have a look at the examples. Because I think if I don't, it'll just be too scattered. So I'll go through the examples. First of all, in the paragraph 8, when Bach says about that we have to figure out the seat of the appoggiatura, that the seat is, the translation of the sits, but I see, like I said before, the sits is it's something more. You could argue that it's the essence, the nature, the place in the world of music that these elements have, that this appoggiatura has, that's what we're determining, or Bach is determining, when he's talking about the sits of the appoggiatura. So it's a very important word, that the sits, just as important as the Abzug with regard to appoggiaturas. And in paragraph 9 at the start, so in addition to what we've heard in paragraph 6, and what we heard in paragraph 6 was the appoggiaturas will sometimes repeat the preceding note, sometimes it doesn't, and that the following note can rise and fall and jump. So in addition to that, Bach tells us that in even time, or equal time, or like 4/4, like common time, that it can occur, the appoggiatura can occur on the downbeat. And here we have figure 2a, and you can see the appoggiatura it's not repeating the preceding note, and the following note is falling. And the appoggiatura is the value of a crotchet or a quarter note, and the principal note has the value of a dotted crotchet or a dotted quarter note. And you can see that the appoggiatura is happening on the downbeat. And I just say about, again, with the piano, the C continues to sound, so that might turn up in the examples when I play them. It's a nuisance, but there's nothing I can do about it. Yeah. So here's the example for figure 2A. And here's B, figure 2B, and you can see it's in 2/4, and the appoggiatura is occurring on the upbeat. And the principal note, the F, has a value of a quarter note, a crotchet, and the appoggiatura is written in with the value of a eighth note or a quaver. And it's not repeating the preceding note. So here's figure 3, and it's in 3/4, and the appoggiatura, like Bach says, it occurs on the downbeat, only on the downbeat, and before a somewhat long note. And there you can see in the second bar, the principal note is a half note or a minim, and the appoggiatura is a crotchet or a quarter note. And it's repeating the preceding note, and the following note is falling. So here's figure 4A, and you see, just as Bach says, the appoggiatura occurs between the closing trill, and it's as well on a upbeat, incidentally, and it's repeating the preceding note. Now here's figure 4B, and so these are the half cadences. And if you've learned, you know, the harmony in university, or in just that theory, you know, that's meant to, you know, follow Bach, you might have learned what half cadences are. And so the first one that will come to mind is the imperfect cadence. So when a cadence ends on the chord of 5, so you have a perfect cadence is the chord 5 to 1. That's what you'll learn when you're learning all that Bach harmony. And an imperfect cadence, which would belong to the half cadences, that would be a cadence which ends on the chord of 5. So in this one here, you can see that it ends on the chord of 5, if you were to look at it in that way. And the principal note is a minim or a half note, and the appoggiatura is a crotchet or a quarter note, and it's repeating the preceding note. So there's the first example of the half cadence where the appoggiatura can occur. The next example is in 3/8, and again you can see the cadence is going, you know, from 1 to 5, so an imperfect cadence, and that's the half cadence. And there as well you can see again what Bach has done is he's presented an example in uneven time, and again shown that the appoggiatura occurs on the downbeat before a longer note, before a long note. And you can see the note, the principal note, the D, is a dotted crotchet or a dotted quarter note, and the appoggiatura is a crotchet or a quarter note, and it's repeating the preceding note, and the following note is falling. The next example, you can see it's going from the chord of 5 or 5/7 to 6 if you want to use that way of looking at harmony you've been taught. And this would be called, you might know it, an interrupted cadence, and that would be another half cadence. So you'll have learnt that. And you can see again what Bach has done. He's provided another example in uneven time, and you can see that the appoggiatura is occurring on the downbeat before a long note. And the next example, what you have is the chord of 5/7 going to the chord of 1, and that is a perfect cadence. So what's wrong with that? Why is that in there with the half cadences? We have learned that half cadences are imperfect cadences and interrupted cadences. We have not learned that perfect cadences are half cadences. So what's the deal? You could ask somebody. And you could wonder, what if I was to say Bach? Maybe Bach made a mistake here. Maybe he just added that example in without noticing that he had intended that example for somewhere else, and it just landed up in there in the half cadence group. And if you'd have pointed it out to him, he would have gone, oops, ooh, silly me. So why is that a half cadence? What if, like we assume the absurd and that Bach didn't make a mistake? What if he didn't make a mistake? Why is that a half cadence? And I'll say why it's not a half cadence is because if you look at the right hand or the singing line, it doesn't end on the final note. We will see when we get to look at example E, he talks about the final note, the Schlussnote. So when it doesn't matter that it's a perfect cadence, when it doesn't end with the Schlussnote on the soprano or the melody line, or on the right hand, whatever you want to call it, it's a half cadence. And that is something you have not learnt. It has been omitted. But it belongs. If they claim, they want to make the claim that the harmony you're being taught is in accordance with Bach, that leaves you ill-informed. And it means what they are teaching is incomplete, inadequate. It falls short of what you're meant to know. So this is new information for you, that a half cadence as well, that the perfect cadence is not entirely accurate. And here you have a perfect cadence, but it's in Bach's opinion, and which the harmony you're meant to learn is meant to be in accordance with Bach. In Bach's opinion, this is a half cadence because it doesn't end on the final note, which is the C. So you can add that to the missing knowledge of your education, what they don't tell you. And that should be amended. That should be, but that way of understanding harmony that you're all learning, it's a Lilliput way of learning. And what if I was to say that whoever devised that way of teaching and looking at harmony, what if I say that they were functioning illiterates when it came to music? And what if I say that in learning that harmony, all these things, learning about what half cadences are without actually knowing that the perfect cadence that doesn't end on the final note is as well a half cadence? What if I was to say that will turn you into a functioning illiterate? What would you say to that? I'm not saying it, I'm just saying, what if I was to say that? How does that strike you, that thought? And have you ever tried composing? Have you learned harmony the way it's being taught and tried composing and found that rather than it being a help, it's rather debilitating, it's restricting, it's handy, you feel stuck, you feel lost when you look at harmony in terms of how you've learned it, looking at this is the chord of 5 and it goes to the chord of 2, and this is 3B and 1C. What if I told you that was not good for you? What would you think? Would there be a grain of inside going, hold on, yeah, no, it doesn't feel great? I've experienced times where that knowledge of harmony is rather restrictive. It doesn't, they say knowledge is power, but that knowledge of harmony rather throws you into the dark, and you don't know, what should I do? Abandon it? Adopt it? How can I play with it? How can I form it into my own? How can I do it so I'm not stuck with a Bach chorale every single time I try and make something that has anything to do with harmony? Or do I just go off the rails and ignore music, like the reaction to all that has been? All this Schoenberg stuff and the likes of him, who totally, embraced their functioning illiteracy and produced something that only a functioning illiterate can produce. I'm not making a formal point here, so it's just food for thought. So the last is a half cadence, because it doesn't end on the Schlussnote, the final note, which would be a C. It ends on an E. and it's a whole note, the principal note, and the appoggiatura is a half note, or it's a whole note or a semibreve, and the appoggiatura is a half note or a minim, and it's repeating the preceding note. It's in even time and it's coming in on the downbeat. Now here's the example C. And that thing with Schoenberg and all, I mean, it makes me laugh when I say that, but they are victims. They're victims of their environment, of their education, of society, of just, they're stuck in the land of Lilliput. So it's not, I'm not attacking. I'm laughing at the absurdity of it, really. Okay, so C. So it comes before den Einschnitten. And Einschnitten is I'm settling on calling it the cutting in. And I think with this, we have to look at the examples and figure out what Bach means through the examples. Einschnitten can mean incision, but what does he mean? And I wonder, like all the different possibilities, like syncopation and stuff like that. But basically, the way I see it, it is actually the cutting in. It's when a phrase or a bit, it cuts the line basically, and it comes in outside of its normal place, so it comes in earlier, and it kind of breaks the pattern. That's what I see here. And so I would say, what is the Einschnitten in this first example of C? And I would say the Einschnitt is the F. And you can see the pattern beforehand. And the F breaks that pattern. It comes in earlier. Instead of it, coming in with the C like the D does, having the two Ds, you have that long F coming in sort of ahead of time. And there you can see the principal note, the F, is a value of an 8 note. And the appoggiatura is not repeating the preceding note, and that as well is a value of an 8 note or a crotchet. Now, and I'll just play it without the appoggiatura. So perhaps, I don't know, I haven't recorded the examples yet. I will after. It might be, you might be able to hear what it's without the appoggiatura. You might be able to hear the Einschnitt, the Einschnitten, and through that start to figure out what Bach means by Einschnitten when he talks about vor dem Einschnitt, and then you can know what he's talking about. And here it is with the appoggiatura. The next example of an Einschnitt, it's in 3/4, and again you can see Bach is, he's showing us more examples of what he said about the in uneven time, it coming on the downbeat before a long note, and here you have it again in uneven time coming on the downbeat before a long note. And here, you know, he says it comes before the Einschnitt. So in the previous one, it did it come, like he said, before the Einschnitt, which was the F. And so here, what is the Einschnitt? And it could be the B. And I'll play it without the appoggiatura and then with the appoggiatura. So it could be the B that is the Einschnitt. And so the C comes in. It has the value of a minim or a half note. And the principal note is the value of a dotted minim or a dotted half note. I don't know 100% sure. Perhaps it's the B. Perhaps it's that G on the left hand is the Einschnitt coming in, cutting in sooner. Maybe. I don't know. But it's one of those two. Here's the example D before the fermata, and the appoggiatura is a 8 note. It's repeating the preceding note and it's rising. It's an appoggiatura from below and it's rising up to the G before the fermata. And just on this piano, the G and the F sharp, they don't have any body to the sound, and there's nothing I can do about it. It just lacks substance, those notes, and it's frustrating. And I say it because the examples that I play, it's not gonna have it's not coming out what ideally you'd hear or would sound, but the piano is inconsistent. It's too loud in the middle, and it's lacking body in that upper octave, in that octave where that G and F sharp is. So I can't project those notes or give them. The piano just doesn't have it in it. So it's not ideal. It's not what I'd say, like, to look at what I do rather than follow what I do rather than what you're hearing the piano, what's coming out of the piano. Yeah. So that's D. And so the example here is, so before the final note, so here we have it, the final note. So this is not a half cadence, this is a full cadence, because it ends on the final note, on the Schlussnote. Whereas the example in B does not end on the Schlussnote, making it a half cadence. So that's new information, that's information that's missing in the education, that should be included, but it's not, because they don't know it. And I'm sure, like, you know, the elite, because this is what you're paying for, they're gonna make this correction the day after I upload this video. You wait, you see the shock waves passing through the classical community, especially in the elites who are on the cutting edge, and that's what you're paying your money for, that you get the expert, the leading expert information, that they are on the very cutting edge, and that somebody like me can't be 2 steps ahead of them, can't show them up at every turn in every video. So you'll see how quick they are to spring to action. E, yeah, so it's you see the appoggiatura is before the final note, and it's coming from below. It's repeating the preceding note, and this one in E is coming before a trill, and that trill as well has its own appoggiatura with it. And then F, you can see the appoggiatura is from above before the final note. And there is no trill preceding trill. And here's the example G. And so Bach is saying that the trill from below, following a preceding trill before the final note, the appoggiatura from below works better than one from above. And so he has the example of the closing trill and then appoggiatura from above, so you can hear that it doesn't sound good, and that the example E sounds better. So I'll play the two after each other so you can hear the difference. And the principal note here is a semibreve or a whole note, and the appoggiatura is a minim or a half note, and it's on the downbeat in even time. So here's H, and yeah, so you have the dotted notes, long, slow dotted notes, and Bach says that these type of notes cater for or can tolerate these types of varying, appoggiaturas with varying length or value. And so you can see that there, that the principal, the first dotted is the first principal note that has an appoggiatura is a B, and that's a dotted crotchet or a dotted quarter note, and the appoggiatura is C, is written in the value of a crotchet or a quarter note, and it's repeating the preceding note and falling. The following note falls. And the next one, it's repeating the preceding note and the following note rises. And again, it's a dotted crotchet. And I just want to talk about the last sentence of that paragraph that Bach writes when these kind of notes, if these kind of notes were to be tailed. So when he says these kind of notes, he's talking about the dotted notes. And so if these notes were to be as well tailed, the tempo would have to be tempered, or it can't be fast. And what he means by tailed is, you know, the way you have a note, and I when was talking about this before, I was mixing up what to call it. It doesn't matter. So don't. There's no consistency there with what I say. I often say stuff stuff comes out of my mouth. I don't realize it's wrong when I'm saying it. I don't notice. But so you have the note, and then you have the stem coming from the note if it's crotchet. And if you know, a single note. And then if that single note was a quaver or quarter note, it would have that thing attached to the stem. And this is what Bach is talking about. Geschwänzt is when the note has got this, the note has been geschwänzt, so tailed. So it has that. And so Bach might say a note can be ein, zwei oder dreimal geschwänzt. And what he means is that note, the stem, can have 1, 2, or 3, or 4, or more tails on it, depending if it's a quaver or a semiquaver, or, you know, a 16th note, or a demi-semiquaver, a 32nd note. So that's what he means. So what he's talking about is, if these notes, the dotted crotchets or the dotted quarter notes in that example, were tailed, meaning if they were not dotted crotchets but rather dotted quavers, that in order that they would as well, the tempo would have to be slow in order to include or to play those appoggiaturas of varying value or length. So that's what he's saying there. And that is something that you might only be hearing here. It's a correct translation that I'm the only person doing. I don't know the one. You can buy a translation of this, The True Art of Playing Keyboard Instruments. And I don't know, I can't, you know, I don't never got a look inside that, so I don't know if they've translated that properly, but I seriously doubt they did, because alone the title, The True Art, is incorrect. It's an incorrect translation. Bach does not say the true art of playing keyboard instruments. He says the true way. And so if they can't get the title, translate the title right properly, I don't think they will be able to translate that sentence properly. And in the internet, I looked in Wikisource. You can see a translation of this, and how that sentence, and this translation, it says, has been proofread twice. And so the translation they give for that sentence is, even if this kind of notes were already skipped, the measure of time must be moderate. So, I'll just read it again. Even if this kind of notes were already skipped, the measure of time must be moderate. That's the translation you're getting. So what does that mean? It means nothing. It's gibberish. You will never understand what Bach wants to say from that translation. And geschwänzt, if you're, like in German, if you're saying die Schule schwänzen, that's like means skipped comes from, when you schwänz die Schule, is you're skipping school, or you're going on the Mitch, or you're bunking off school. I don't know, you're sort of, you're not turning up in school when you should be. Even though school is on, you're off in the shopping centre or somewhere else, when you should be in your classroom. So you're skipping school. And so that's where that comes from. But skipped means nothing in this context. It means absolutely nothing. And if you ask that translator, what did Bach mean when he said, even if this kind of notes were already skipped, the measure of time must be moderate, he wouldn't have a clue. He wouldn't have a clue, or she. And if you know, And you can ask, the experts who will nod at the translation, what does that mean? Watch them nod and then watch the charade fall. When, like a magician who's, when you figured out how the magic trick, when what he does is ceases to be magic and you see through it. So that's, that's the difference between what you're getting here and what's available in the Land of Lilliput. So that's what Bach means. He means if the notes were quavers, geschwänzt, tailed. And that'll be very valuable for the future in this book, in understanding, in other moments where Bach says geschwänzt. Diese veränderlichen Vorschläge von unten kommen nicht leicht anders vor, als wenn sie die vorige Note wiederholen. Die aber von oben trifft man auch außerdem an. Nach der gewöhnlichen Regel wegen der Geltung dieser Vorschläge finden wir, dass sie die Hälfte von einer folgenden Note, welche gleiche Teile hat, Figur 5a, und bei ungleichen Teilen b 2 Drittteile bekommen. Außerdem sind folgende Exempel, Figur 6, merkwürdig. So there's an appendix to this paragraph, which I'll read and translate for you. Bei Vorschlägen, wobei von dieser gewöhnlichen Regel abgewichen wird, tut man wohl, dass man sie mit in den Takt einteilt. Die Zerstreuung und auch bisweilen die Vermutung, als ob der Kopist den Vorschlag nicht akkurat genug geschwänzt habe, weil vor diesem alle Vorschläge ohne Unterschied in der Geltung der Oktel vorgeschrieben wurden, kann in der Ausführung Fehler veranlassen, welche den Gesang verstellen und auch wohl zuweilen eine unreine Harmonie verursachen. So, what we hear there in the appendix is the first piece of information as to why a composer would write out the appoggiatura identical to the other notes and divide it up with them in the bar. And that is one of the reasons is that when they deviate from the common rule, that the appoggiatura takes up half the value of the note in a note with equal parts, and it takes up 2/3 of the value of a note with unequal parts. And so you can see in figure, so then you'd write it out in the bar, divide it up in the bar with the other notes and write it not as a small note but as a big note. So there's the first reason why you'd find that happening. And so the next examples. When Bach says here that these examples are merkwürdig, if you translate merkwürdig, look in the dictionary, you might encounter words as like being they're odd or peculiar or strange. I don't think that translation of the word merkwürdig is doing justice or is appropriate for these examples. I think I suspect that merkwürdig here is rather an older idea of the word, in that it's worth noting. These examples are worth noting, not that these examples are kind of a novelty or a oddity, but they are worth noting. And so these examples in figure 6 are worth noting. And what you can see in the first one, you see in this first example, you can see in the first bar, Bach writes the way it appears with the appoggiatura. And in the next bar, he writes out the way it's played. He divides up the appoggiatura into the bar with the notes. And so you can see the principal note is tied, the E is tied to the next E. And that begins on the third beat of the bar. And that the appoggiatura takes up the entire length of that first E, and only the Abzug only comes then kind of at the end of the tie, then with the note, the principal note is tied to. And you could imagine maybe that the harmony, we don't see that here, but that the harmony stays the same for the whole bar. So that's something to note. I won't bother playing these either. There's no point. So the next example, you can see Bach writes it out with the appoggiatura, and then he writes it out as it's played. And you can see there that the appoggiatura is the length of a quarter note or a crotchet. And the principal note as well is a crotchet. And what you have there in the execution, or how it's divided up in the bar, is that the C only comes then where the B would be coming, and then the B and A are played at half the value afterwards. Yeah, and it could be again in this bar that the harmony stays the same for the whole bar. And I would refer back to the example C, that first example of the Einschnitt, and there you can see as well, you might have thought Bach made a mistake there with he tailed that appoggiatura wrong because it was the length of a crotchet, even though the principal note was a crotchet. And so there you can maybe think about how that would be performed in the light of those examples which are noteworthy. Yeah. The next example, again, how you see it and how it's played. And again, the principal note is a tied note. And the appoggiatura lasts for the entire length of that first principal note. And the Abzug only comes there with the note it's been tied to. The next one as well, another tied note. The appoggiatura is, you can see the value, how it's written in. And that lasts the Abzug only comes then with the second note of that tie. So it supersedes the entire principal note basically. And the next example, you can see the appoggiatura coming, attached to. First of all, you can see that the appoggiatura is repeating the preceding note, and that the following note is jumping. And you can see the appoggiatura comes before a dotted quaver or dotted quarter note. And because I am able to correctly translate that last sentence in paragraph 9, I am able to directly connect this example directly to the example H with the long dotted notes. And Bach doesn't let us down. He says, if these notes were geschwänzt, auch schon geschwänzt. And what does he do? He provides us with an example of these notes, these dotted notes being geschwänzt, so having that tail on them, making them quavers instead of crotchets. And he shows us how it's performed. And I'm probably the only one who's able to connect this example to the example H and see, yes, this is Bach. Just like the one with the crotchet thing, he's referring, it's almost like he plants these in the examples for certain people to notice. Those people who are paying attention will notice and go, hold on, what's this? What's up with this? And then when you're paying attention, it'll come. He's not spoon feeding it. Those who don't want to pay attention will miss it. He doesn't want to help anybody who doesn't know how to help themselves. But because I correctly, this translation, even if this kind of notes were already skipped, the measure of time must be moderate. I know that person who translated that will not have connected that example back to example H. But there you have it. There you have how it's divided up into the bar. And so you can imagine then how H is divided up into the bar. And here's the last example of figure 6. And again, you can see the note is tied and that the appoggiatura takes up the length of the entire principal note basically, and the Abzug only comes on the tie. So those are definitely examples worth noting. And it was worth noting because he further clarifies the example H and the proper performance of H. And I thought with that in mind, I could have a quick look at, the Mozart Sonata in F major, pt.2, at the third movement at bar 16. And what you have in bar 16 is an appoggiatura written in small, a G, connected, and the Abzug is the principal note is the F. And in the light of those, what we've heard in that paragraph and what we've seen in the examples, you could imagine 3 ways of playing it. And the first would be, and I'm sure there could be an honor roll in this, it doesn't matter if there is an honor roll or not, but there could be one, of those people who play that appoggiatura as the length of a quaver or a 8 note, as it's written there. So that would be one way that they're playing it. Another way that they're not really playing it, but maybe it could be played is short, but we haven't gotten to the short unchangeable appoggiaturas. So just in connection with the variable, we know the appoggiaturas of varying length or varying value. So that would be one way it would be played. The other way it can be played is when it takes up, according to the common rule, 2/3 of the value of the note. And then, in light of what we've seen now, these noteworthy examples, you could wonder, hold on, maybe is the G meant to be played, for the length of the first half of the bar, and that the Abzug on the F only occurs in the second half of the bar, so you're only hearing one F instead of 2 Fs. And you could wonder, hold on, would that be a valid way to do it? And regarding the first way to do it, that playing that as a quaver and going down to the F, one, it doesn't adhere to the common rule that when the note is unequal, that it takes 2/3 of the value of the note. So it's not adhering to that rule. And you can wonder, does it do anything? for the phrase or the melody line or whatever you'd call it for the whole subject. When you think of playing it to 2/3 of the value of the note, what that does, aside from it, first of all, it adheres, it doesn't deviate from the common rule, as we heard in the appendix. It doesn't deviate from the common rule. And what it also does is it prepares this is something that the first version doesn't do, and what's lacking, what's lacking in the interpretations of the people who play it short or the length of a quaver, is that appoggiatura lasting 2/3 of the value of the note. It prepares the listener, it prepares your ear for the syncopation that comes then in bar 20 and 21. So it prepares the listener and you as the performer for that syncopation. So that syncopation falls, it's not so jarring. It's been prepared. The seed has been planted earlier with that appoggiatura. So that's a positive, that's a plus reason as to why one would choose that. And then you can think, well, what if, like with the noteworthy examples, what if I was to hold the appoggiatura, the G, for the first half of the bar and only played the Abzug then, and the second half of the bar playing one F? And you could try that and think, yeah, that doesn't sound bad. It doesn't sound off like the appoggiatura when you play it the length of a quaver sounds off. But if you look in bar 18, what you have is an appoggiatura before the C. And this can be connected exactly to that appendix what Bach wrote. So you have another appoggiatura there. And you can maybe guess, why did Mozart write this appoggiatura? Why did he write that appoggiatura equal to the other notes and divide it up with them in the bar? And you could ask somebody why. Why did Mozart do that? And then you can wait and see if the person you asked said, because this appoggiatura deviates from the common rules in value. And when it does, like Bach says, it's better to divide it up with the other notes in the bar. And that is exactly what Mozart did. It deviates from the rule. That's an appoggiatura belonging to a C, which would be a dotted crotchet or a dotted 8 note there, and that B natural would be a small note before that. And you would have had an instance exactly like those examples that were noteworthy. And what you have is an appoggiatura deviating from the common rule. It's lasting longer than 2/3 of the value of the note. And so what does Mozart do? He writes it out as a full note. And that is why he writes out that, divides that appoggiatura up in the bar. And because he does that, that would undermine the validity of having that previous appoggiatura lasting half of the bar, lasting the length of a dotted crotchet. Because had Mozart wanted that, he would have done the same, and he would have divided it up in the bar, written it out equal to the other notes. But he didn't. So there's insight into what Mozart could have been thinking. And this is perhaps that appoggiatura in bar 18, the B natural, is exactly the same as that appoggiatura in the G. It's exactly the same. And Mozart made a decision whether to divide it up in the bar or write it in small notes. And you now know what he could have been thinking, the reason for doing it. And you could ask those who are meant to know and see if they know, see if they have an answer as to why. And will they have even known that that is an appoggiatura like the other appoggiatura? And you could, look at that whole section from bar 15 right to the end. And you could wonder how many appoggiaturas are in that. And you might have thought there was only one appoggiatura, namely that G going to the F. But in every single bar of that, aside from when the syncopation starts, in every single bar is an appoggiatura. And they are all the same. They are all appoggiaturas. And the E appoggiatura, that's a short appoggiatura of unchanging. You know that its length is not variable, it's short. But it as well is an appoggiatura. So you have appoggiaturas in every single bar there. And so that's a way you can keep in mind what Bach is saying and then have more insight into the score, into what Mozart wanted, in understanding what Mozart is doing there. And you can see the level of thought is there's a lot more thought into it than you'd be led to believe based on what you're being taught yourselves. And you can know that the way you'll hear in Mozart that there's not enough dynamic markings. For that G belongs an F, a forte sign for that G. For the F, the Abzug, the note, the principal note that the appoggiatura is attached to that belongs a piano sign, a P. To that B natural belongs an F in dynamic markings. And to that C belongs a piano sign. So the only reason, this is just an example, the only reason they say that is because they do not know how to read the score. They have, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, drink deep or not at all. They have this half knowledge, superficial, the Lilliput, the mediocrity which attacks genius, which eradicates all those elements of genius, just like the half cadences. There's an entire half cadence unknown because of mediocrity. And here as well, you have, it's unknown, but you have a way here of, thinking through it and then deciding on your interpretation, how you are going to perform these appoggiaturas. And I'll just say quickly, a Vorschlag, the emphasis is on the principal note. It's before is pre or before, and Schlag is like the hit or the strike, so it's before the strike. And a little note at the end of a note, like little notes at the end of the note, in German that'll be called, Bach will call that a Nachschlag, so that's after the note. So the focus is on the principal note. Just like with Bach, the focus is on the Abzug. That's the essential part of the appoggiatura, the Abzug, the principal note. The note you're drawing off the appoggiatura. Whereas when you're learning it in English or in your lesson, you're learning about the focus is on the appoggiatura. You're learning the appoggiatura means to lean. So I want you to, and they'll say, so I want you to lean in on the note. They're focused. They get it exactly like 180 degrees wrong. And they're not on the they're on the outside looking in. They do not know what it's like. They do not know what it's like to possess virtuosity. They don't know what it's like to exist in the world of music. They are looking out of the cage at the world of music. So everything, just like you'll see me, and this is my right hand, but to you, it's this hand is on your left. Everything is the opposite. And so that's what's happening with the way you're being taught, the way professors, all these people, the way they understand piano playing. It's the mirror image of what piano playing actually is. They get everything exactly the opposite wrong. And this is just one example. Like in the teaching of the appoggiatura, they are focusing on exactly the wrong note than somebody like Bach is focusing on. He's looking at the Abzug, whereas the emphasis and the Vorschlag in the word, the main focus is on the principal note, not on the appoggiatura. And the appoggiatura, you're learning it's to lean in on the note, as if there's no other note that exists except the appoggiatura. And that is wrong. That is exactly the opposite of how you're meant to consider it. So I'll just, yeah. So that's just how you can apply what Bach says in the appendix there. And you have the first knowledge of why Mozart or Beethoven or Bach will have written the appoggiatura in, as opposed to and dividing it up in the bar as opposed to writing it as a small note. And so far we haven't heard that it's so people like you or me don't ornament the note. Die bei Figur 7 befindlichen Exempel kommen auch oft vor. Die Schreibart davon ist nicht die richtigste, weil bei den Pausen nicht Stille gehalten wird. Es hätten statt derselben Punkte oder längere Noten gesetzt werden sollen. So here's figure 7. And there you can see the appoggiatura is written in with the value of a minim or a half note, and the principal note as well. And how it's performed, Bach writes then how it's performed or executed, and you can see that the principal note is the Abzug is played and lasts the duration where that should normally have been silent, where the rest would have been. The next example, you can see again the crotchet. The principal note is a crotchet or a quarter note, and the appoggiatura is a quarter note, and then the Abzug occurs there where the rest would have been in its execution. And the same goes for the last example. The appoggiatura is the value of a quarter note, as is the principal note. So the principal note is played there where there should normally be a rest. So this is a mistake that occurs common. And you know what I've said about the relevance of Bach, I do not know the relevance of this, but I am sure that should I encounter the situation, I am prepared for it, and I know what the answer is. And then I know the composer wrote it wrongly, but I know how it's meant to be played. And on the one hand, this can be interesting in terms of how Bach understands the appoggiatura and the importance the appoggiatura has in that it will cancel out a rest in order to be, you do not do damage to good taste in your performance of the appoggiatura. So on that hand, it's revealing in terms of how important the appoggiatura is. On the other hand, the relevance, it could be very relevant depending on if you encounter it, which you would if the urtext editions haven't, meddled. You probably, I know that just as Bach says, this will be present in a lot of music you encounter. Yeah. And I just want to say about that B natural appoggiatura on the Mozart, you can see that if Mozart had written that in as a small note, the danger that people would have played it wrong and distorted the melody line, just as Bach says in the appendix. And in writing it out and dividing it up between the notes, Bach ensured that even the people, regardless as if they perform it properly or not, they're not distorting the line of music that Mozart intended. Whereas with the other one written in small, it could be that those people who play that as a quaver are distorting the line as a result. And where Mozart will have taught that people will play it with 2/3 of the value of the note, just like he might have been worried about that B natural, that had he written it as a small note, that people would have played that with 2/3 of the value of the note. and gone up to the C, or played that B natural as a quaver and gone up to the C, and thus done it wrong, and he didn't want them to play it wrong, so he wrote it in equal to the other notes divided up in the bar. So that's it. The next paragraphs we're going to deal with the short appoggiaturas of unchanging value, and we are going to learn more about where they occur and how to spot them, and you know how we can make our decisions. And hopefully that with the Mozart thing, that was hopefully that, I don't know, is interesting. Okay, thanks, bye.